this whole initiative was brought to us by a lot of really strong and resilient youth across both Northern and Southern Ontario, and was co-created by a couple very cool organizations like the Northern Lights Collaborative, Young Leaders Circle, Catalyst X, Coach Katrina, and was sponsored by the Ontario Trillium Foundation's Youth Opportunities Fund. Today we have Ben doing a session on creative writing.
Okay, so I'm Ben in Thunder Bay, Ontario, also known as Plan B Strict 9. I'm a multidisciplinary artist and creative person and teacher, I guess, instructor. I founded the Earthling Art Collective here in Thunder Bay in 2018, and we've been able to open a place here with a studio and a bunch of different things that youth can use and kind of develop their skill sets over like a long-term basis, because I used to teach workshops in communities, including Thunder Bay, but also like remote communities, and I found that a lot of the times 3 days wasn't enough and they wanted to do more, and the things that they had developed in that period of time they wanted to elaborate on. So I wanted to have a space where especially the kids coming from remote communities had a place that they felt safe and they could come to, and kind of, you know, while they're here for that week or whatever, they can come on an ongoing basis and feel like they have somewhere that they're appreciated and they know people already, and they can continue on with what they were starting. So we just secured a big grant for that recently. Actually, I'm not allowed to talk about it, but it's I'm gonna leave it at that because they're not letting me talk about it yet. But yeah, so that's pretty cool because we're gonna be able to do it for a few more years, it sounds like. So yeah, today I've been brought on to do a little bit of teaching about creative writing, or just discussing creative writing basically. We only have an hour, so we're just gonna kind of like talk about what I do and what I do to stay inspired, and you know how I keep myself motivated to write every day. Kind of I've been using spirit writing recently, so it's kind of a new thing for me, and I didn't even have a term for it until I kind of like started doing it, and I was like, hey, maybe this is like an existing thing. So I kind of looked it up, and it's just about letting your subconscious, or if you believe in spirits and things of that nature, like people kind of using you as a conduit to, and you just kind of like let it go, you know, and you write whatever comes to you and whatever comes out on the page, and edit that later. It's really unique. You come up with some pretty interesting stuff that you normally wouldn't have thought of if you were being like conscious about it. So it's almost like a dream state kind of thing.
I call it like stream of consciousness writing.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's
Yeah.
the only way I know how to write.
No doubt. It's really beneficial to the creative process if you're stuck in a block or something, or you think you're stuck in a block. That's the other thing. It's like it's a self-imposed thing, writer's block, right? It's like this, like there is no real. It's not a real thing. It's almost like we do it to ourselves. It's just a way of like putting yourself into this negative space. You need to break out of it by writing. That's the only the only way to get out of it. Doesn't matter if you think it's good writing or bad writing. That's subjective anyway. You know, it's just about just writing, right? So every day, if you feel like you're stuck in some sort of loop, just write and write and write and write and come back every day, and eventually you'll find that you've broken out of it. You know, because it's just another structure.
I find journaling as like a super helpful way to, in times in my life where I have a lot going on and I really, really need to be on top of my stuff. Like just journaling is so important. And like I can't meditate. I have a really, really hard time. I just can't get into it. I have so many thoughts, and I know that the whole process is like being mindful and like, and like I would honestly, I've met a Tibetan monk, and I just like stood in front of him, and like he didn't even seem that enlightened. Anyway, but I'm sure he is very cool and like has a great brain, and his brain scans probably show. But yeah, journaling.
Yeah, for sure. For me, like it's actually almost kind of, that's like how I meditate, is by doing things like that, right? So I find the same thing. Like it's hard for me to get the distractions out of my head and to just kind of like focus on you're supposed to do the body check and go through and let let everything loose and whatever. And I find with my writing, like it takes me to that place because I'm focusing, on the writing, right? So you find that you're just kind of like in this Zen state anyway. It's like a form of enlightenment, I suppose, in its own way. And actually, that's part of what I wrote about here was just keeping a notebook. Like they say paper works better. I don't know why. For me, I write digitally actually, but they say, and I actually used to write on paper, and I feel like it might have actually been beneficial. I'm gonna try and go back to it soon, but it's just you want to just keep doing things every single day, and so you don't lose anything, right? So like, say you're watching a film. This is something like people like, how do I get ideas? And there's so many things. Like every day you're watching something that was made out of a creative space. It was made by another creative, so you can find some inspiration in that. Like I used, for example, here I wrote down Forrest Gump. Like the whole box is like a life, or life is like a box of chocolates. So instead of like, hold on here, let's see exactly what I have. But you could turn that into like a hook in a song. So you like elaborate on that, right? So instead of saying like life is like a box of chocolates, you could be like, life is a gambler's dream. You never know what you'll get. But if you're in on the scheme, it'll be one they won't forget. Or something like you just kind of like, turn it into, and people will recognize that. That's if you're trying to write pop music, especially, it's really important to like utilize terms and structures that people are familiar with. So it's you want to use something that you've seen, and maybe like not use that exact reference because that's a little too whatever. But if you use that whole thing, people will be like, hey, I've heard that. They'll latch onto it somehow.
I think that's like a great suggestion. I remember reading some sort of like piece on it, and it was Margaret Atwood, and she was basically like, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that writers have is that you need to have like an original idea. Like none of my ideas are original. Really, it's like all taking it from someone and like recreating it to be my own. And kind of echoing your point as to what you just said.
It's really true, like what is an original thought? We all want to believe that the only original thoughts came from the creator like a long time. So like everything else we're just conduits, right? So yeah, it's a beautiful thing to kind of come to terms with that and figure out that you're not. It's letting go of ego too. So another big part of being a writer, I think, is kind of like finding that you're just a part of this creative structure, like the universe is created. So you just become a part of that and like another cog in that in this cosmic machine, man. It's a beautiful thing. But another thing is reading, absorbing as much as you can about the genre or style that you're trying to write about, so you can learn like structure, flow, and just the overall rules of the genre that you're. Because genres are really, I don't really like genres in general, but it's kind of like I use it loosely because it boxes in the creative process, but I think it's important to find the flow that will convey your message to people as like effectively as possible, if that's your intention. So it's like if you're trying to write fiction, you might not even be intentionally trying to write fiction. But if that's what you're into as someone who reads, and you're reading about fiction or you're reading fiction all the time, you want to find what works, right? And then kind of like utilize that to the most potential so that you can structure something that people, once again, like something, because people are all about normalcy, or not normalcy, but just comfort, right? So like if they find a structure, if they're reading a book and they can already kind of know, like, and anticipate not what's gonna happen, but how it's gonna happen, right? So like you'll have like the introduction and there's like a structure to it that people are familiar with, so they don't get lost and they don't kind of like lose their train of, because you want to keep people into setting goals, man. That's another important thing. Just kind of like a regular routine for your writing, because like it's falling into patterns of Einstein said it best. If you're absorbing too much material, if you're reading and taking things in and you're not, I say you should write a book report on every single book you read, everything. everything, even if it's nonfiction, if it's like a scientific textbook or something, you just write it out, because then you're utilizing what you just read, right? And you don't fall into lazy patterns of thinking. And then what you want to do is go implement in the physical, so that you make it into a physical reality, and you solidify those ideas in your head.
So it's really interesting that you brought up book reports, and like, I don't want to be the nerd who's like, I love book reports, but like, honestly, English is like a subject that we teach young people. And like, realistically, like, let's say this workshop had like people in high school, like whatever I was about to say would be like super helpful for them, which is like, the one goal of that English credit that you have to get a good grade in is that it's supposed to teach you critical thinking skills. And like, all kids basically get critical thinking skills at like a different level, right? So there's no, like, it's so arbitrary to be like, everyone who's 16 must be at this level. And different things in your life sparks that education. And like, honestly, I don't think any educator has it figured out. Like, I can reflect back at which point, things really clicked. And it wasn't in high school. Like, in high school, I was just like bullshitting and like regurgitating. And like, my marks were representative of it. But like, I was also struggling. Like, I remember being in grade 12 and like being like, I really want to go to university and this mark needs to be really good, but I have no idea how I'm supposed to be successful. And like, the teacher would be like, you need to figure this out. And I would just feel so lost. And so if someone at some point figures it out and like goes back and like really teaches kids in like a helpful way that isn't how we do it today, like, shout out to them, because I think that you should be able to get those critical thinking skills without having to go to university, because that's like such a huge price tag you're putting on a really critical skill that almost everyone needs in their daily life. And like, no offense, but I think I got my critical thinking skills like far into my university career. And like, it shouldn't be that way, because like, it's like classist, to keep it at that. I know people are laughing, but it's true.
Mad true, for sure. For sure. Like, I grew up in poverty, so I had to teach myself all of that, right? So it was kind of like, I'm lucky. I'm so lucky that my dad is a literary person, and he kept a library, and he would read to me every single night, and just kind of like helped me establish that love of reading. And if I hadn't had that, I always think about that, like, where would I be if that hadn't have occurred, right? So that's part of it too. It was just like, he would read to me, and then he'd be like, so what do you want to do with this now? Like, what did we learn from this book, right? Like, what are we gonna go do with it? Like, are we gonna, like, if we read a book about gardening or something, we go plant something. Right? So like, you're like figuring out that this is like the translation of
applicable.
And you're making it into like a physical.
It reminds me of just a story of like, KRS-One. Well,
yeah.
Of course KRS-One. But like, KRS-One, like, this guy dropped out of school like in middle school, right? Grade 7, grade 8, and he was like homeless and whatnot. But what he did is he went to the public library. Like, he didn't even go to school. He went to the public library, and he's KRS-One, the teacher. You know what I'm saying?
Matilda.
So to me, I think the point to me is like, I think it's classist in certain things with school, but like, I actually think that you're at an advantage sometimes if you're in poverty or you're in margins, if you have the right environment, if you have like a father like yourself or whatnot, right? So to me, it's a blessing that we're able to go through our stories of struggle, but like you're talking about right now, listening to albums, listening to music, and writing a book report about it, and then living that out in life. Like, to me, that's just like education, right? So yeah,
absolutely. And I think one of the things that I say, like, I studied poli-sci, and like, you can get a political science degree by just like having a library card. There's like no reason, like, at no point did I, like, most of my degree was like books that were written like way beyond, and like a lot of universities, like, honestly teaching yourself and like reading it, not understanding, reading it again, not understanding, like asking people questions, and then just like you figure it out eventually, you know what I mean? But Yeah, a library card. And just like libraries are so cool and like one of the last places in our world right now where there isn't an exchange of money happening.
Mm. It's just true. So
Legit.
Yeah, I was gonna
Well,
say, I didn't buy any. My first year of college, I bought books, but then I went to college another year, McMaster for 1 year, and then Algoma for 2 years, and I didn't buy any books beyond my first year of college. But I like obviously read, like I obviously looked for literary articles and went to the library, but I just didn't buy anything. I just like learned that knowledge, and like I had pretty good grades. So like you can find that knowledge without having to like attach money to it. Like the knowledge is out there just to like build on what Busher was saying.
And swag.
it's pretty
Swag.
neat too. It's also an interesting thing, like growing up in that environment, you kind of like because I only did grade 8, I never got the indoctrination of those years of fascists teaching everybody the exact same thing, so
And that
I
probably helps your creative writing too, eh?
oh totally right, like
Yeah.
I think totally did. Like I sit with people who have done the whole university thing, and a lot of them think the same because they were taught to learn the same, right? So it's like, it's tough to break out of that. It's indoctrination. It's a type of brainwashing. They want us to all be a cog in the collective symphony, right? So it makes sense that we would all be taught to kind of be drones in a sense.
that's why I love having taken like the Indigenous Learning Program, because I think it's like different from I did take like some of the intro classes, like intro to social work and intro to psychology, and it did really feel like the structure felt all the same, and the classes were so huge that you were just like a number. Whereas like with the IL program, it was like very small, and you were given that space to actually learn from each other and not just the professor. And it wasn't that banking method that most education systems use. It was more of a collaborative approach, and that's why I'm excited to do this kind of work with all of you, because it is sort of putting those things into practice. It's not just theoretical then. I think a lot of organizations say that they work as they want to work together and they work collectively for like the greater good, but they don't actually practice it. Like I've experienced that with a lot of like mainstream institutions, I guess. And yeah, so
And that just reminds me, Ben, what was the name what was the name of the collective?
Earthling Collective.
Earthling Collective or Earthling Art Collective.
Dope. So a lot of this stuff you're applying in there, eh? Yeah.
It would have been like it used to be called the Ghetto Children Collective, and we found it's a group I grew up in, and like most of us are dead, so there's like 2 of us left. So I wanted to like honor them with a name, and because it started out 6 of us wanting to do hip hop and create. We were skate kids and whatever, and then it turned into this negative thing because there was all these other gangs, and these other people caught wind of the name and they thought we were gangs. So then all of a sudden we had to be a gang because we were like, it was like super, because we started to get roots from these actual established like Indian posse and whatever. So we actually had to like posse up and become this thing and it turned into this really negative, like got registered with the gang unit, and it was just like a whole bad deal. And then
that's a serious point. That's a serious point that you're making right now, even with like to the conversation of creative writing and just expression and stuff like that, like how spells, like how powerful words are and how they attract certain things, right? Like, because that whole, you're right, it's a totally different energy. Ghetto kids to earthlings, like that's a totally different energy. So
and I found myself like in the community, like there was a business owner, there was this like white guy business owner that was like talking to me about it, and he's like, you really shouldn't use that name because it's so negative, and no white institutions like will want to partner with him and fund him. And I defended it. I was like, no, I really get it, because like he's trying to honor people that have passed on because of like living this lifestyle, and like I think that's a beautiful thing, but it's just like not everyone will get that maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, if you're gonna keep funding from a youth org with just because of their name, then we probably don't want your money.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
That's very
like
true.
you're not the type of person that I want the money from, because I'm sure it comes with other stipulations that.
Interesting.
My main actual like intention was to reverse the negative connotations on the word to change the reality of the kids growing up thinking they're ghetto and that has to come with all this other stuff. Like we're living out this movie. I remember sitting watching like Menace to Society and you know,
Wow.
like all these movies as a kid and listening to like 50 Cent, Get Rich or Die Trying. We're all sitting there, and then we like ended up, you know, we become a part of this thing that's just like, and you put on these negative, and it doesn't have to be negative. Like
Word.
word ghetto doesn't like just because we're stuck in this environment, it doesn't mean that we
It
can't.
sucks though, bro. Honestly, it sucks because that's what Tupac tried to do. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
It's not like, it sucks because like, and I'm the most rebellious. I actually tried. I really tried. Like I tried to flip words and all that stuff too. But I'm like, damn. Like sometimes people aren't ready for it. Like I think you made the wise move. You know what I mean? Not to say you can't honor them in other ways or even eventually do a Ghetto Kids. Like you still can do that. But I think you're wise and just, you know, just trying to flip that energy for the reality that, you know, you're in. Like,
yeah, for
Oh
sure.
man, when you bring up 50 Cent, it just like brings back memories because I just remember being like a 16-year-old and you know, and even though I didn't grow up in poverty, I always had friends that did grow up in poverty. So and then like I moved out when I was 16, so I was like living in poverty. So it's like I went from, you know, I did kind of experience that a little bit too. So it was interesting going to university and realizing, oh my God, there were these years that I actually was homeless, but I didn't consider myself homeless because I had friends that like took care of me, you know?
Yeah,
yeah, man.
and
Anyways, I
words are
don't know
so
you're at
powerful.
your workshop. I don't want to throw you off.
Yeah, yeah, we're just getting into this like whole thing. That's beautiful. I love that. That's, you know, the power of collective discussion. It's awesome. But yeah, with setting goals with writing in general, it's about like for me, I have to create a space that I can withdraw to and flesh out my ideas that no one else enters. Like they say that the biggest bane to a writer's existence is other people. So like if you're in a train of thought and someone comes along and they're like, hey, can you make me a sandwich? You know what I mean? It just like throws you, like you're like, whoa.
Okay, I have like a super relatable thing to say to that, just kind of like throwing in a feminist analysis. So, the biggest reason why historically men have written so much and have produced so much is because they literally have had women doing all of the work that otherwise preoccupies women from being creators and like writers. So like, and I've noticed that just doing admin related work. Like, so I was the executive assistant for the founder at a tech startup, and like straight up this, and like the whole like sphere is just so toxic. But if I took like a snippet of it, is like these men are organizing their lives so that they can take out basically any kind of activity, and there's an actual name for it, that stops them from thinking in a certain way so that they can put their creative energy towards just like thinking of ideas. And it's like, wow, if women had so much freed up space where they weren't taking care of their parents and their children or their partners, they would have, you know, the same amount of ideas as like Bill Gates, who gets to like go away and like think on think weeks, which are actually a thing he does. And like there was a report recently, and I think Wall Street Journal reported on it, and it basically was like editors from publishing companies were like, we've never seen something like this. There's like a 50% drop in like female academics like publishing work during COVID. And I think I've already spoken about this at a different workshop, but it's like totally related to care work being gendered. And it's like realistically you see it in your family. So I am a family of like 5 sisters, so I can't see it in my own family. But like if you have a sister, mostly who's doing the care work of taking care of your parents? It's like probably your sister. And it's like this like unsaid thing in our society, but it's totally reflective in the types of occupations we end up taking, right?
Yeah, totally agree. That's actually super like poignant. I never even really like I consider that aspect of it to an extent, but the COVID part, like wow, because I could totally see it. Like even as I took PSW and there was no other men in my class, like, you know, so
Yo,
totally.
you're a PSW? I had no idea.
Yeah,
Okay, like literally, my mom's like disabled right now, and I refuse to hire a PSW just because like if I can pay them like a living wage, only then will I hire a care person. Just because like they're valued so much more than like $15 an hour, you know what I mean? And like also their treatment of my parent will be at, it's just like how I would get paid if I was working like 5 elderly people. Like it's just like normal sense. But it's so funny because the system's just so underfunded, and it's like Black and brown women who are doing that work. And it's really interesting because I am really interested in the automation of jobs and how a lot of jobs that men predominantly do will get automated. And it's really sad because, you know, we look at toxic masculinity and unpacking that, a lot of it is teaching men to care. And a lot of it is teaching men to actually be socialized in a way so that they're drawn towards more care or jobs in like those fields where you have to be empathetic and like emotionally intelligent. And it's really scary because if we don't have those conversations with like young boys, it's gonna like, you know, it's gonna be like a lot of men got super depressed during the 2008 recession because most of the jobs that were lost were men. Like it was like white collar jobs. And like for the first time in United States history, women were more employed. And things like that gonna start happening where like women will continue to be able to find work, whereas men won't. And it's like, what do they turn to? Who do they turn to?
My friends, totally.
Right? Like substances. Who do they turn to? Like violence. And it's so it's really important to have like creative outlets and like that teach them ways to process.
Yeah, men's wellness spaces. I think that's going to be critical in this time. Yeah,
definitely. Teaching young, like you said, like teaching emotional, just how to handle your emotions and how to like, you know, that's the biggest thing, because once you understand yourself, then you can give yourself to other people. And it's like, you know, if you don't know how to handle your own emotions, you're not going to be able to deal with someone else's. So it's, you know, it's very, and I don't know why that's missing for most men, like what that catalyst is, or what, you know, I guess it's probably media and a lot of factors, right, that come into that. But it's, I don't know, man, it's a tough egg to break for sure. But I think we're at a moment in time where we might actually be able to change some of the stuff, which is kind of neat. So looking forward to seeing how the world's going to look after all this.
That's our hope. That's our hope for sure. But that's really sad to hear those stats that, you know, it's like women are declining in academia. It's interesting because I see both, like I'm half like, you know, European Canadian on my dad's side, and I'm Ojibwe on my mom's. And I see it, my uncle actually takes care of my grandfather with Alzheimer's on that side. And then that's on my Ojibwe side, but on my you know, Canadian side, it's my aunt, but she just happens to live like very close by my grandma too. So it's just sort of, part of me is like, oh, I want to like relocate to Ottawa and take care of my grandma because she like raised me. But I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's a possibility, but.
So
like the things we take for granted, right? Like I have 4 sisters, so it's kind of like whoever steps up first. But reflecting, like I've been away from my parents like for over 2-3 years, and in that time I got to travel, I got to take like random jobs that really, if you like, there's this like gross pathway that we look at, and it's like, you know, success is achieved this way, and people who end up taking care of their parents end up getting pushed back. And I see it with my sisters who have stepped up to take care of my parents, and you know, I have like more resume experience, but like they do too. Like they juggle like appointments with doctors and like all of this stuff. And like we really need to start seeing that care work be more legitimized in the real world, so that people aren't being like impacted in a negative way when they go to get like a real job.
Yeah, and COVID has started that conversation, I think, too, right? Like about like some of these elderly homes, how they should be treated the same as like any healthcare worker, but they're private, and that's kind of like the issue. So maybe that will change in our time.
Just to add to like domestic labor, this labor of like the home needs to be valued the same as any kind of like wage or piecework labor. So the Industrial Revolution and like how we changed our family systems from being like a mother and a father who's like the breadwinner that brings us home and that kind of idea. And then how we switched into like women are working, but now we're expected to like work in the home and then also produce at work. So we have this double duty. So the labor in the domestic way needs to be valued in the same way that it is in the community, because we're expected to hold both on our shoulders. And I wrote a little rhyme about it and I have a song about it, but I just took out the rhyme and I put it in the chat because like I live that. That's my life.
Honestly, I like, one of my favorite things to do is like look at my boyfriend and be like, do the dishes, the revolution starts at home. Like, that's it. I say
But for real, yeah, but my man does the dishes, but yeah, I know what you mean.
That's hilarious. Well, I dig where this conversation has gone. It's dope. I like it.
When I think what,
so like it all ties into this, man. It's awesome.
I was actually just gonna say that how it ties in, because when you look at like the goals of your writing and setting those goals and being in a certain space for it, like even with Cece, her rhyme is about a certain you know, has a certain tone, a certain mission towards it, and to be able to express yourself and voice it. So it's kind of cool how you can use creativity to even tell your story and paint that picture so you can evoke emotion in other people to take a certain action, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's why the CIA has files on every major artist. Basically.
Yeah, word. Yeah. It's dangerous.
Yeah. We could, you know, honestly, artists, like, I think that could be, we need another Renaissance. That's, or, you know, whatever, right? Where the art is more taken more over anything else. Like, that's not the art, but the creation of new ideas, and just kind of like, because that's what's needed now. We're at a catalyst moment in general with climate change, everything, right? We're on the precipice. So if we don't change our way of thinking majorly, like, what do we have? We don't have a future. So it's.
I agree. But I think it starts with us, and it's like, do we value, like, I value the artists in my life, so I buy their stuff, and, you know, I buy their whatever, albums, paintings, like, you know, and we, like, that's how it starts, I think, like, and also, like, just the treatment of artists. Like, I always think about, you know, Tommy Horrocks, and how he talked about, he remembers a day when it was like you would walk in somewhere and you'd be treated really well. Like you'd get, you know, a free drink or whatever, a free meal, and it's just like we don't value our artists the same way like we did, like socially, I guess, culturally. So it's just, we bring that back too, and I think we're kind of doing that by putting this platform for artists, hopefully.
I think people are recognizing it because they're stuck at home now, and they're like, "What do I do?" Yeah, you need entertainment. We create entertainment, so. Like, I was gonna get more into descriptive stuff now. So like a big thing for me is show not tell when you're writing. Like maybe not lyrics per se, but more like narrative. Like if you're like, an example would be like, the house was messy and dirty. You know, instead of saying that, you could say like, as I entered the home, the smell was overwhelming. Old pizza boxes and cigarette butts and other detriment lined the furniture. You know, like you can like make like you create a visual and kind of like a feeling, you know, or another example would be like, it was a windy day. Instead of saying that, you could say like, I stepped outside, my hat was swept off my head and my umbrella bent backwards. You know, like you can like kind of just dramatize almost, you know, not dramatize.
And it's like, so that thing that you just said, show not tell, show don't tell, that like goes with everything, with even like academic papers. And I wrote a personal statement like when I was applying to graduate school, and that's like such an unnerving process as like a woman of color, as an immigrant, as someone who like English is not their first language, like as someone who just doesn't have, like, I think if I had parents who were academics or had any type of like knowledge of the academia, like they would be able to help me, but it was like so scary. And I remember like the first time around I ever wrote a personal statement, I had like a really good professor. She's like one of my like best friends in the world, and she basically like hand held me through the process. And like it was kind of I think everyone should write a personal statement when they finish their degree, because it's like it really is like it gives you closure. It's kind of like a book report, right? You really like look back and you're like, what the hell did this degree give me? And it was like a really awesome piece to kind of end it on. But like if I like go 2 years after, I had to do the process again. This time the professor wasn't near me because I wasn't in school anymore, and I had to do it a lot on my own, and it was much scarier because I felt much like farther away from academia because I wasn't in school. I was like, maybe it's been 2 years, like maybe they just like don't think I'm like as good anymore, like they won't let me in. But that whole process of show don't tell, like I remember even like my friends who were editing parts of it, they were like, this is great, can you like tell me at a point like that you actually did it instead of just writing this? And it's like super, yeah.
Yeah, it just gives more in depth, and you kind of get like a real feel for the writing instead of just being told this is what it is, right? You become a part of it almost. It's kind of funny. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And now I was just gonna get into structure was like the last bit, and syllables and stuff like that. Like mostly with writing. My example was gonna be from hip hop, obviously, because that's what I'm most familiar with. So basically, like the established rules to follow is most songs are structured this way. So it'll be like a 4-bar intro, and a bar is like a 4 count of music, depending on the speed. So you can have double time. So that would be 8 bars of double time, or so that, yeah, a bar is like basically fits on a page as 1 line generally. So like you would have 4-bar intro and go into like a 16-bar verse is pretty standard. A 4-bar bridge, and your verse would be like your where you elaborate on whatever you're trying to convey in your song. And then in your hook and your bridge is kind of like building up into the hook, building the energy for the hook. And then the hook is to kind of keep people, it's a place where people could sing along and become familiar and relate to your song in a way where they can kind of like, especially if it's something easy and catchy. I try not to like really go too in depth with my hooks. Like a lot of people really try to put a lot in there, and it's like that's where your core, or that's where your verse, you know, that's what the verse is for. Like your chorus is more for catching people's attention, and I think that that's lost a lot of the time, especially in hip hop, because people are like, we're challenged in hip hop because we're so anti-pop and we're so anti, you know, country and all these other genres. It's actually really, it's a stagnated genre, I find, in a lot of ways. It's super masculine to lots of toxic masculinity in hip hop, and yeah, so there's a lot of downsides to being a part of that, but at the same time, like I'm glad I am, because I can kind of help push it into that balanced zone.
That's why I really appreciate like ones that challenge it, kind of like Tupac. I feel like Lauryn Hill, and I don't know. I feel like in ways they uphold it, but in ways they challenge it, and you know, are a bit more conscious, I guess. And those like stand out to me, like Nas. I think Nas.
Gosh, yo, you need to take in Rhapsody. If you don't know Rhapsody, you need to take in Rhapsody.
Rhapsody. No, I haven't. I've never heard them.
You'll love Rhapsody, Sarah. Trust me. Yeah. Rapsody.
You know what I have a question about, and this is like, I guess personally, and it's more like vibes. So I feel like all people have like a rhythm, and it's kind of performative technically, because, you know, in the morning you get up and you kind of like put your clothes on and you're like, this is what I'm performing. And like related to that, it's how we speak, and a lot of it is what we've seen, and so we're mirroring it, but a lot of it also just kind of put together. And the reason why I bring it up is because like with music, and I mean any art you're creating, it's in it, right? Like a lot of how you act and perform. And with hip hop, okay, I've always felt strange, and it's because I'm like a very analytical person. So at school, I was like, okay, this is how I need to act in order to get these grades. And so like, then I did it and I was good. And like, I immigrated here. So I was like, this is what I need to do to be accepted into like Canadian society. And so I started speaking like that. I started like, and it was like a very like theoretical thing in my head where I was like, okay, these kids, when they do this, it's accepted. So I'm going to do it. And like a lot of me unpacking it was like, understanding why those behaviors were like socially accepted, not accepted. And like when I look back at it, I'm like, whoa, oh my God. I used to be like kind of, so I am this way because I grew up in like a upper middle class neighborhood in the Greater Toronto area. And I speak like this because of this, right? And I'm kind of getting lost as to what my question was, but I think vibes are important. How do you tell someone where to get started if they're trying to, I guess, restart or trying to figure out where they fit?
Into hip hop or into music?
I think into anything, because I guess what I'm thinking is like, I feel very far removed from the whole process. Like, I feel like I don't really have an original place to start. Like, a lot of my writing has to do with being a part of a diaspora, and which is like kind of talking about, you know, being lost. And in general, like, I don't want to give a white girl vibe, you know, I'm wearing a fucking turtleneck.
Yeah. Oh man, that's actually really tough. You know, I think.
And it's a real question because, the reason why I'm thinking about it is like, there's also a whole conversation and dialogue about co-opting cultures, right? Like when you see a brown man saying the N-word and like they act like they're in the hood, and like, I don't want to police anyone's language, but also like, don't say the N-word, you're brown.
Ben and I are always policing people about that one.
Yeah.
But that's not, it's because it's not your lived experience, right? Like,
Yeah.
like an Indigenous person can dictate whether they want to be called Indian, Indigenous, Aboriginal, or there are many denominations. Maybe
Totally,
they're Anishinaabe, maybe they're Haudenosaunee, whatever, right?
But
So,
I
like,
think it's problematic
on our lived experience.
when in the Indigenous community is using a racial slur. Like, to me, as a friend to Black people that have told me, you know, that they don't like to hear that, like, I will go there and have that uncomfortable conversation. That's me using my privilege. I don't know if it's my what privilege, but I'm using my privilege in that.
Absolutely, but I think it goes to the conversation. Sorry, and maybe it's because I'm like, that's the one, and it's great that I have like people like Ben, Jermaine, and like anyone. I would love all of your input into this, because it's kind of it's a real question, because I see that as like an important dynamic in
we rarely have those conversations about, you know, Black racism. It is really prevalent in our Indigenous communities. I can definitely tell you that from various friends' experiences working in Indigenous communities, and even from like, Indigenous people themselves witnessing it. Because like, some of us are conscious about it, but some of us aren't. Like, that's just kind of the way it is.
It's a relating thing, because our circumstances are so similar, and we watch these films like I was talking about, Boys in the Hood and things of that nature growing up. We related to that because we're like, man, that's us. You know what I mean? Like, we see the same kind of deal, right? So I think that's what it ended up being. It was media related, and kind of like, you just, yeah, you're like, man, you see not a mirror image, but like, this is a parallel almost, right? So you kind of, I think that is probably where it started. Probably, you know, it was just kind of more like a.
Busha, so what is your question? Are you talking about like it seems like when you're talking about like let's bring the context of like creative, just writing. It doesn't even have to be creative, but like finding your own voice and your own identity that's like a unique to yourself, but also it comes from somewhere. And I think from my perspective,
and kind of like rhythm, I would say. I don't really, and I guess maybe instead of vibe, rhythm is the right word, because like, we're talking about creative writing, and I very much enjoy creative writing. And rhythm, because I feel like I haven't really ever felt connected to a specific sound of music. like
Mm.
really, really deeply connect. And the reason I think I say that is because I feel like there are some people who are just, I see it and I'm like, wow, like you just really love that genre, and it's in your clothing and like the way you perform and talk and move.
Yeah.
And I think I'm just getting at it from like an analytical perspective, where I'm like, okay, well, I perform this way and I learned to perform this way. So at which point did I lose the learning of connecting to sound in an authentic way? Or like, what song should I connect to? You know what I mean?
I think, well, from my perspective, and Ben is gonna have a great perspective to come in too, is like, I think to start with silence and start with the rhythm of your heart, and the natural rhythm, and trying to really listen into that, and then noticing the things that you do take in and the things that you do find that, because what is rhythm at the end of the day, right? I think Ben probably could like break it down in a cool way. Actually, Ben, you want to use like show not tell what rhythm is? I like the exercise. You're really going off. Yeah.
What rhythm is? Oh, there's so many different, like if you're speaking about in patterns of music, it means one thing. If you're speaking about like life, yeah, it's
like lifestyle. I would say like lifestyle, the rhythm of life, their culture. Like, yeah, you could.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh man, I would say it's like finding your, like it's familial. So like you have your family and your ancestors and your environment that you grew up in, and there's a pattern there of some sort. There's a rhythm there. You just have to put your finger on it and kind of find that pulse, right? Because it exists. Like, well, it might be multiple things. Like I see myself as a student of hip hop, but I've also grew up with country, and I grew up with all these other genres, right? So and that's just a music relation, but yeah, it's like just kind of paying attention to your surroundings and finding the pulse, and that's the rhythm. Like you said, following your heart, and it's finding you is the first step, and then you can kind of go from there, right? Figure out what you want to be associated with.
I know it's 4:00 now, but I just to build, because I just feel good energy off that last one. Hopefully this can answer your question, but sure, and you'll explore more. It's like really paying attention to the different moods and the energies, like what makes you happy, what makes you sad, what makes you mad. Like those things will kind of show you a bit of like, yeah, what kind of vibes you want to continue to attract in your life, and which ones you want to let go. And I think it's really up to you. You can actually create your own, really. But also the nature, though. That's why I go back to silence. Like your nature is there for sure. You just have to like shed.
Mm-hmm.